Chapter 460, A Sigh Over Pongal Castle. The battle raged on. The Red Earth continent, an immense slab of solid rock, stood firm against the onslaught, far sturdier than the scattered isles around it. Amidst the titanic clash between the world government's forces and the allied nations, neither side had yet gained a decisive edge. It was a stalemate. High above the fray, Nethin hovered, his power enough to shatter the balance in an instant. A single shot from him would have sent the world government's armada reeling. Yet he held his peace, his expression unreadable as he gazed toward the heart of the holy land of Marijoa, Pongal Castle. From this distance, he could make out the empty throne, its gilded arms reaching skyward. Before it stood 20 ancient blades, each a trophy of one of the founding kings who forged the world government 8 centuries ago. Those relics of history felt weighty under Nethin's stare. "Today," he murmured, voice low but carrying to every ear that strained toward him, "I will set you free." A hush fell over the battlefield as thousands of warriors paused, breaths caught. Then, unwavering, Nethin extended his hand. Energy crackled around his palm, charged and purposeful. Slowly, deliberately, he pressed it toward Pongal Castle, as if to break the centuries-old bonds at their very source. At that moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. The strongest man in the world. Countless eyes were fixed on Nethin as he hovered above the battlefield. When he finally descended, touching down with a single hand, a collective hush fell over the crowd. Every gaze, on Fujitora, on Kaido the Beast, on Steelbone Kong, even on the countless fighters below, shifted instantly to him. There was only one true center of attention, the supreme ruler of all nations, the Ghost Hand, Nethin. As long as Nethin stands undefeated, no matter how chaotic the world grows, or how dire the world government's odds, victory will always slip through their grasp. In fact, the entire order of this world rests on his shoulders. Its soaring heights are his alone to claim. In his pirate days, he earned the moniker Ghost Hand for his lethal, relentless style of combat. Now that title has taken on a loftier meaning. One hand supporting 10,000 kingdoms, ruling from a throne carved out of the very sky. He exhaled a low, resonant hum, as if the world itself trembled at his presence. Under the watchful eyes of thousands, Nethin's simple palm strike finally descended. In an instant, the fabric of the void twisted and ruptured, leaving a colossal handprint scorched into the air, clearly visible to everyone below. Within that imprint, chaotic energies writhed and pulsed, as though the very essence of Pongal Castle had been captured in a single, devastating blow. "How dare you! Stop this at once!" At that command, 3 of Pongal Castle's 5 elders burst forth to intercept him. One elder cracked his knuckles and summoned a swirling gale in one hand and jagged bolts of lightning in the other, a true master of the natural disaster fruit. Beside him, another elder adjusted his spectacles before igniting his blade with pure sword intent, its edge humming like a lethal whisper. The third simply rolled up his sleeves, revealing a hulking frame of rippling muscle and raw, unrestrained power. With a thunderous roar, wind and lightning collided overhead, and sword energy slashed through the sky in brilliant arcs. Those chaotic forces fused in midair, coalescing into a radiant barrier of white-hot power that flared against Nethin's palm. For a heartbeat, it seemed the 3 elders might crack under the onslaught, but their combined strength held firm, forcing his blow to stall mere yards from the castle walls. Nethin tilted his head, studying the trio with icy calm. He wore no hint of surprise, only the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly how far his power could reach. "So," he said, voice as smooth and cold as steel, "these are the famed defenders of Pongal Castle?" Below them, the crowd fell silent, bracing for the next exchange of titanic forces. "Nethin, a pirate who's honed his strength to this very edge, we admit we underestimated you, but you still can't topple our world." The 5 Calamity Stars spoke in unison, their voices ice-cold. "Last time at Marine headquarters, you and Hell attacked, and still failed to stop him. Our backup arrived too late, but here in the holy land of Marijois, the situation has changed. Even though the 10,000 nations unleashed a shock-and-awe assault, the world government held firm. Now only Nethin stands before us. No matter how formidable he is, he cannot prevail against the 3 of us in concert, especially with the Celestial King himself watching from the palace. Today, the seas will bow to us. Your odds, 0. They lifted their swords in perfect synchronicity. One slash, one decisive cut. Steel sang through the air as the 5 Calamity Stars unleashed their ultimate sword techniques. As the supreme bladesmen of the world government, each style bore a power said to eclipse even the legendary Rain Shiryu and Momotu's feared overbearing strike. Yet Nethan remained motionless, his dark eyes narrowed, ready to meet their challenge head-on. Nethan stood alone before the 5 elders of the Natural Disaster Division as they unleashed their full power in a single, coordinated strike. Each of the 5 sent forth his signature attack, and the last elder fused a hurricane of molten rock with a supercharged air punch. The ground itself trembled under the sheer force of their combined onslaught. Yet Nethan barely flinched. He shook his head once, then drew in a slow breath and let out a soft sigh. With nothing more than a casual lift of his hand, the elemental fury hurtling toward him simply vanished. The magma storm collapsed into nothingness. See how the air blast died on the wind, as if the assault had never been launched. For a stunned heartbeat, not one of the elders could believe their eyes. Steel Gukong and the other onlookers gaped in sheer astonishment. No visible shield remained. No trace of spatial distortion rippled outward. The attack had been erased from existence. Wu Laoxing's eyes widened so far they seemed ready to leap from their sockets. In that frozen moment, the elders realized they had no clue how Nethan had nullified their most devastating strike. Then, with that same quiet sigh, Nethan stepped forward. In the next instant, he stood, calm, unbroken, directly before the 5 elders, his expression utterly serene. The 5 venerable masters of physical combat standing nearby were so practiced and perceptive that they could almost foresee every move their opponents made, yet none had anticipated Nethan's sudden appearance. Terror flashed across their faces. By the time they registered his presence, it was already too late. Nethan's palm struck down in an instant, unleashing a shockwave of distorted energy that rippled through the air. The master's eyes widened until the pressure of their own vision seemed to burst them from within. Desperately, they unleashed the full might of their devil fruit powers, calling upon the forces of calamity and ruin, but their combined strength shattered beneath Nethan's single, unyielding blow. One by one, the 5 disaster masters crumpled, bones snapped audibly, crimson arcs spurted from shattered lips, and each warrior flew backward like rag dolls torn from their moorings. When the last of them hit the ground, dust billowed around his supine form. Impossible! The master of swordsmanship gasped through clenched teeth. With a roar, he sprang to his feet and swung his blade in a desperate counterstrike, only to find time itself rebounding his effort. His sword swept through empty air, then snapped back to its original position as though the swing had never happened. And in that frozen, disorienting moment, Nethan's palm descended once more, his power as inexorable and precise as destiny itself. Ghost Hand. Ghost Hand. Until this moment, the name had never felt so fitting. Nethan drew a quiet breath, then thrust his palm forward. At the same time, the 5 ancient star sword techniques exploded outward like shooting stars. In an instant, his enemy's body shattered into fragments, blood sprang across the sacred ground and staining the Holy Land crimson. Chapter 461, The Last Battle. The 5 elder stars of the Taishu sect stood frozen, their faces drained of color as terror gripped their hearts. One of them finally mustered enough will to invoke the moonstep technique. In a blur of motion, he vanished, his goal to race back to Ponjel Castle and raise the alarm. But before he could complete the step, reality itself snapped back. As though time had reversed, he reappeared exactly where he'd started, eyes wide with disbelief. Even the legendary prowess of a sea-peak master was powerless against the force that held him. Nethan watched in cool silence, a flicker of emotion passing across his features. He lingered for a heartbeat, enough to let dread settle into his foe's bones, then casually lowered his palm. A ripple of distortion blasted outward, shattering the Elder Star's final defenses. In an instant, blood spewed and bones cracked beneath Nethan's overwhelming power. Stroke 1, stroke 2, stroke 3. 3 of Taishu's revered Elder Stars collapsed, their bodies broken, their threat extinguished. In the stillness that followed, only Nethan remained standing amid the ruin of their last desperate stand. Silence fell over the entire battlefield, as though the very air had frozen in shock. Every warrior, whether it was the government marshal awaiting the cyborg Kong's arrival or the Wano captains poised under Fujitora's command, halted mid-strike and looked up. The relentless cacophony of clashing steel and roaring artillery simply died away. Even seasoned admirals like Aokiji and Kizaru exchanged grim, disbelieving glances, and Robin, Nethan's closest confidante, stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding. The 5 old stars, fallen so swiftly, she had trained alongside Nethan, shared his victories and defeats, yet nothing had prepared her for this. The raw power it took to cut down such titans in a single, ruthless sweep left her breathless. High above them all, Nethan hovered on a thin current of wind, his palms still tinged with the echo of that final thunderous blow. Captain Shiryu of the Rain and the other allied commanders stared up in slack-jawed silence. They had witnessed Nethan sever Admiral Sengoku's will and cleave through Admiral Akainu's defenses in one devastating strike, already feats few could match. Yet this was on an entirely different plane of force. Fujitora's gravity-tinged blade hovered inches from his side, but even he did not dare move. Marines and Wano samurai alike felt the same unsettling realization. They no longer stood at the summit of power. Nethan's strength had shattered every known measure, leaving them adrift in a new, unfathomable reality. As the dust settled and the last echoes of clash dissolved, all understood the truth. The farce of battle was over. A new era had begun, and Nethan stood at its apex. Nethan's blade whistled once and the 3 5-old stars fell, their lifeless bodies thudding onto the blood-soaked earth. He paused, eyes lingering on the fallen warriors with a flicker of somber respect. Then, silence. Across the battlefield, every combatant froze. The steel skeleton warbeast halted mid-scream. Aokiji Kiabu's sword stopped an inch from its target. Peach Rabbit and Green Bull hung in midair. Even Shiryu of Fujitora Rain and the champions of the 10,000 kingdoms stood motionless, hearts pounding in disbelief. They could scarcely grasp what had happened. If Nethan could annihilate 3 of their greatest fighters in a single stroke, how could any of them hope to withstand him? The green pheasant, the yellow monkey, Steelbone, all legends in their own right, would surely fall as effortlessly. A god, someone whispered, voice trembling. The Tianlong had long claimed divine status, yet here was proof of a power that outshone any myth. Without another word, Nethan turned away. He would no longer lead them on this field of battle, for the war was already decided. It made no real difference whether the world government's low-level officials lived or died. Once the 5 elders and the celestial dragons were wiped out, Wan Guo could seize control of the entire government without resistance. For the surviving bureaucrats, it would be nothing more than a change of masters. High above the silent battlefield, Nethan fixed his gaze not on the 2 remaining elders, but on a lone figure lurking deep within Pongal Castle. His voice, as cold and dull as iron, drifted across the empty fields below. At the sound of his words, everyone on the front lines froze. They turned toward Pongal Castle in stunned disbelief. To the world at large, the 5 elders were the unassailable core of the world government, each one a pillar of its secret parliament. But few knew there was an even greater power behind them, the king. Inside the castle's grand central hall, the last 2 elders stood before a single shadowy figure. Moonlight spilled through towering stained-glass windows, ruffling the dark cloak draped over his shoulders. He faced away from them, as if gazing out at some distant horizon, and the chill draft he left in his wake raised goosebumps on the elder's arms. "My lordum," one of them dared to whisper, voice trembling with reverence. But the figure remained motionless. In that profound silence, his very stillness spoke more loudly than any decree. Im stood before them, silent, his gaze fixed through the towering windows on Nethan as he hovered in midair. All across the battlefield, breaths caught in throats. Not a single challenge dared break the hush. Nethan remained motionless, studying the man who even the 5 old stars dared not defy. A flicker of curiosity danced in his eyes. "Could it be?" he began, his voice barely more than a whisper. Before he could finish, a tremendous force burst from within Pongal Castle, radiating from Im's very body. It surged outward like a colossal tsunami, sweeping over the holy land of Marijoa in an instant, and then over the entire Red Earth continent. Wind and clouds alike froze in that moment. Soldiers from every nation, naval and army officers alike, stiffened as though turned to stone, then toppled one after another like fallen dominoes. Even Imperial Admiral Shiryu Fujitora of the Rain Squadron, Fleet Commander Gang Kusora, Admiral Aokiji, and the other top commanders reeled under the weight of Im's aura. Their hearts thundered, cold sweat beaded on their foreheads, and their knees buckled. This was absolute domination. Nethan hovered above the battlefield, utterly untouched by the chaos ripping the earth below. Even red-haired Shanks's famed conqueror's haki would pale beside what he faced here. He'd always known it would be so. Nethan released a quiet sigh. An 80-century-old king who's extended his life through surgical fruits to rule unchallenged for 800 years. That is true tyranny incarnate. Below him, Im stared with widening eyes. The Overlord's conqueror's haki was powerful enough to shatter matter itself. Pongal Castle had already collapsed under its invisible force, but its colorless shroud had masked the ruin in an eerie silence. A low hum pulsated through the air, and Nethan's features sharpened. Im felt a strange energy stir, not elemental, not spatial, but temporal. It was time itself bending to a single will. Far above the slowing fruit, or the speed fruit in power, this was the apex of all devil fruits, the time fruit. An ability truly unrivaled, capable of shaping reality 1 second at a time. Nethan became sharply aware of his body and surroundings, just as time itself seemed to accelerate. A human life normally spans about 100 years. But if time surges forward so that those 100 years elapse in the space of a single minute, death becomes inevitable. Chapter 462, A New Era, the finale. Nethan's lips curved into a cold smile. So this is it. He thrust his armored hand into the crackling void, ripping it open like parchment. Waves of distortion surged outward, and the temporal rift that had ensnared him warped and collapsed in an instant. Too bad, he murmured, surveying Imu below with steady eyes. Before he'd mastered the power to distort time, her devil fruit ability would have overwhelmed him. It might not have killed him outright, but resisting it would have required every ounce of his armament haki, an agony that would have shattered his body. And facing Imu's absolute dominance, he never would have gained the upper hand. But now, with time itself at his command, Nethan could neutralize her power entirely. Imu stood motionless, utterly speechless. 8 centuries of existence had stripped her of all emotion, leaving her a hollow shell of pure authority. A sudden gust roared through the chamber. Whoosh! Reality trembled around them as Nethan readied himself to end her reign once and for all. Nethan dove from the sky, directing every ounce of his power at Im. Just as he'd predicted, Im's martial color and knowledge color blazed with a strength honed over 8 centuries, abilities so supreme they might well be called overlord colors, absolute and unshakable. Still, Nethan's own martial and knowledge colors were scarcely inferior. After refining his overlord hue, his twisted time ability could perfectly counter Im's time fruit, and his twisted fruit proved even more flexible in combat. Boom, boom, boom. Their collision shattered Pongal Castle in an instant. From the heavens crashing into the ground, shockwaves ripped across the Red Earth continent, pulverized the naval headquarters, and thundered out over the sea. Even so, neither fighter yielded. Instead, the larger war ground to a standstill, not from exhaustion or surrender, but because these two alone held the true power to decide the outcome. From a safe distance, armies and admirals watched in stunned silence. Nethan could wipe out the government forces with a thought. Im could erase every elite soldier of every nation just as easily. In the end, victory would belong not to any empire, but to whichever of these two titans emerged triumphant. The clash between Nethan and Im had raged endlessly, both warriors grievously wounded. Yet Nethan's body had transcended even Kaido's strength, and his regenerative power was nothing short of immortal. Im, despite his ageless lifespan and peerless physique, remained mortal. With every passing moment, fresh wounds blossomed across his flesh. Then, at last, Nethan unleashed a single, cataclysmic strike that shattered the very red soil continent, casting its broken lands into the sea and unleashing a towering tsunami. Silence followed. Floating above the now calm waters, Nethan exhaled. He looked around. The roiling storm clouds had evaporated, replaced by an endless, clear blue sky. It was over. In the shattered ruins of the Holy Land below, survivors watched in stunned awe. Even Steel Gukong and the others felt their life force ebb away. as though 10 years of cultivation had been stripped from them in an instant. They shook their heads with rueful smiles. "We've lost. This is the fate of the world government." And so the year 1520 of the Hyuan calendar dawned as the first year of the Age of Nations. Chapter 7. The Fall of the 800-Year Empire. For 8 centuries, the world government had held absolute power. Its navy headquarters and the so-called Holy Land stood as the final symbols of its might. But under a coordinated assault by every nation, its defenses shattered. The Holy Land fell, the naval bastions surrendered, and the once omnipotent ruler, Tian Longren, vanished without a trace. In those first chaotic days, pockets of unrest flared across the globe. But the coalition of sovereign states, led by the steadfast Admiral Wan Guo, moved swiftly. Within weeks, they had re-established a new naval command, snuffing out rebellions at sea before they could spread. Meanwhile, the Revolutionary Army, once the vanguard against world government tyranny, heedlessly disbanded on the orders of its leader, Meng Qidlong. Through it all, one figure emerged as both legend and mystery: Nethan Rhodes. Official histories carefully noted his exploits, how he had once been branded a pirate by the old regime, yet used that very label to unite fractured shipping routes, dismantle corrupt officials, and carve open the trade corridors the world government had monopolized for centuries. Under the guise of pirate, he sailed from one continent to the next, toppling warlords, rescuing oppressed citizens, and rallying disparate navies to a single cause: the abolition of the old order. Now, as future scholars begin piecing together his life from fragmentary reports, some praising him as the savior of free nations, others condemning him as a lawless marauder, one question rises above all. When he was first accused of piracy, what did he feel? Legend has it that, standing on his flagship's deck, Nethan looked toward the distant horizon and let the sea wind carry away the past. He did not deny the accusation. Instead, he claimed it as his own, embracing the outlaw title so he could then rewrite its meaning. In doing so, he did not just destroy a corrupt empire, he created a new legacy for the seas themselves. And that, many say, was the moment history truly began to turn. Nethan's lips twisted into a wry smile. "I never asked to be a pirate, but if that's the only path left to me, then I'll tear this world apart to remake it." He tapped a parchment pinned to the bulkhead, a detailed chart of Sky Island Bika. "Looks like Dragon won't be meddling in the kingdoms anymore." Across the cabin, Admiral Rhodes lounged on a plush Shimayun divan, methodically peeling an orange. He popped a segment into his mouth and chewed without looking up. Monkey D. Dragon, leader of the Revolutionary Army? His fate hardly warranted Rhodes's attention. With his current power, toppling Dragon would be child's play. Once he possessed the strength to obliterate anything, nothing in the world could resist him. Power, Rhodes believed, was the ultimate suppressor. If you couldn't bend fate to your will, you simply acquired more strength until you could. Standing nearby, Robin rifled through a stack of reports. The Navy's been reorganized. Fujitora has been named Admiral of the newly established headquarters. Aokiji, whom you spared, declined to return and has quietly retired, much like Dragon himself. Rhodes leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Very well. Keep the orders coming." Nethan leaned back in his chair as Robin scrolled through the Council's latest reports. "There's still a shortage of administrators," Robin began, "but if we follow your suggestion, granting each nation full autonomy, much like the old world government did, it really isn't that hard to oversee. Think of each island not as a single town to manage, but as its own sovereign state. That way, the central authority only needs to handle international affairs rather than day-to-day governance." She fanned through several documents, and now that the celestial dragons and world aristocracy are gone, there's no more tribute, no sky-high taxes crushing the common people. With heavy levies removed, poverty and famine have all but disappeared. The legendary treasure One Piece has faded into a thing of the past, and nations across the globe have never been stronger. Stability has finally taken root. Nethan gave a nonchalant shrug. "So the world's in order. There's not much left for me to do." He glanced at the next file on the table. "What's our next move?" Robin tapped the leather-bound folder labeled Princess. Her eyes met his. "Now we need to decide what to do with the princess." Nethan's fist curled shut at his side as he murmured under his breath. Hancock can be willful, no question, but ever since the world government fell, she's actually shown some restraint. And Nami, she's as capable as they come. Not perfect, but more than enough. His words died on his lips the instant Nico Robin tilted her head and offered him that calm, knowing smile. Around her, petals unfurled like dark wings, and in a heartbeat 7 slender arms sprouted from her shoulders and neck. The inky limbs snaked around Nethan's throat and waist, lifting and twisting him until he felt every bone in his body protest. Gritting his teeth against the vice of her grip, Nethan tried to wrench himself free. "Don't be ridiculous." He spat, but he knew it was useless. A sudden metallic click echoed in the charged silence. Then the world went black. Postscript: I've finally finished writing. This has been the toughest book I've ever tackled. Over the past months, my grandmother fell gravely ill, and my grandfather suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, and through it all, I've confronted just how precious and fragile life can be. When Grandma first went into the hospital, I couldn't bear to leave Grandpa's side. Even when her condition began to improve, I rushed to the city hospital to check on him, my heart heavy with worry. Diving into fantasy was a bold move for me. After returning to the mainstream market and struggling to stay afloat, I convinced myself to take this risk because I still need to make a living. The income from my previous books went straight toward family expenses, building a house for my grandparents and parents, paying off mortgages, and covering mounting medical bills. Between Grandma's tumor treatments and Grandpa's emergency surgery, our savings have been nearly wiped out. Writing remains my only source of income. Yet before their illnesses struck, the house we built for them, a 3.5-story Western-style home in our small town, was finally completed. As their grandson, being able to give them a place of their own brings me immense pride. Even now, when everything else feels uncertain, that achievement still warms my heart. Thank you all for reading, and for letting me share this story with you. Author's note: I'm Xiaofeng, a college student whose only real expenses are food, water, and tuition. Beyond that, I have little need for money. My greatest wish is simply to make my elders proud and happy. This story started out as an outlet for my frustrations, a way to exercise every bit of resentment I'd been carrying, like Sun Wukong with his golden cudgel, smashing the heavenly palace in one blow. Originally, I planned to adapt it into a full manga. In the end, though, it never quite lived up to the depth of the Gen Dun or Sword Soul series, and a few narrative inconsistencies persisted despite my best efforts to smooth them out. Still, I've poured my heart into this 1,000,000-word journey, Pirate World, and now it's finally complete. It's my 3rd full-length novel, and I've stuck with it to the very last page. Thank you to every friend and reader who has supported me along the way. Your encouragement means the world. I hope you enjoy the adventure. Thank you all for sticking with me through those rough times. I truly appreciate your support. Now, about my next novel. Although calling it next seems odd, since the manuscript has actually been finished for quite a while. Some readers have pointed out that my stories feel like fan fiction cloaked in fantasy trappings, and in a sense, that's exactly what this one is. An expansive crossover that streams characters and settings from across the entire anime multiverse. The book is titled The Last Contractor, and its protagonist is Nethan. Although I completed the draft long ago, I've been hesitant to promote it. I'm still uneasy about how to present it and how faithfully to blend the familiar with the original. If you remember Infinite Stream, it started out as fanfic but grew into something more unique. This new saga follows a similar path, balancing beloved characters with fresh plotlines. To give you a taste, I'll be releasing the very first chapter as a preview. I hope you'll dive in, enjoy the adventure, and lend your support once more. Thank you. Support the new novel, The Last Contractor. After a catastrophic mishap, the Nightmare Realm has lost its tether to the real world, and with it, the power to summon new contractors. Freed from its sinister influence, Earth has become a veritable paradise for those who once served the realm. Now, only one contractor remains linked to Nightmare Realm. Number 000, Nethan. In the anime dimension, he is the last seedling rooted in that dying domain. In the real world, he stands as the progenitor, the father of every other contractor. Alright then, let's see what the system has in store. Main quests? Let me choose my path. Hell-level side quests, which one offers the best reward? I'll take one of each. Challenge accepted.